Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We are here for a hearing on the proposed 2021 budget of Tri-Township Consolidated School Corporation. My name is David Marusars. I am the Deputy General Counsel for the Department of Local Government Finance and have been appointed by the Commissioner to act as a hearing officer for this hearing. Helping me out today is Jenny Banks, the department's communications director. She will be helping me with facilitate the use of WebEx, this telecommunication service we're using for this hearing. No doubt you're all no doubt aware that we're doing this virtually in light of the coronavirus pandemic, and we've done several of these hearings in a virtual format this past summer and fall, but there still could be possible from technical issues. So we appreciate your patience as we try to make this go without incident. We are here today to conduct an administrative hearing pursuant to the laws of the state of Indiana, as found in Indiana Code 61.1 17-6.1. On October 12th, 2020, a petition was filed with the department requesting a hearing on the school corporation's 2021 budget. The corporation received the petition on the same day. The budget was adopted by the Tri-Township Consolidated School Board on October 22nd, 2020, and was subsequently submitted to the department. By law, before the department may review, revise, reduce, or increase a political subdivision's budget by fund, rate, or levy, the department must hold a hearing upon submission of a timely request. Notice of the time and place of this hearing was published in the Westville Indicator and Regional News on November 12, 2020, pursuant to Indiana Code 61.1 17-16.1D. Notice was also posted on the DLGF website, was provided to newspapers who made such a request pursuant to the open door law, and was also provided to the superintendent of the school corporation by email. The purpose of this hearing is to receive oral evidence and written evidence from those who wish to speak on the corporation's adopted budget. At the conclusion of this hearing, I will produce a report for the commission to consider when reviewing the corporation's budget prior to certification of the budget order. No substantive determinations will be made at this hearing. Before I continue on, I'll just, for those who may not have, who were not here when last I spoke before 1 o'clock, if you're having trouble hearing, please feel free to type in the chat box if you were on in the computer. If you're listening by phone, I don't know exactly how to help you. I apologize, but again, we're trying to work with this technology the best we can. The following order of presentation will be used today. First, testimony will be presented by those persons wishing to speak in opposition or in petition against the budget. Second, evidence will be presented by the representatives of the school corporation. For anybody, as stated in our notice, in order to make sure we were able to conduct this hearing in a smooth manner, I requested that any request to testify be sent, that anybody wishing to speak provide me a written request to testify at today's hearing. And we did receive several persons. I will go ahead and list them off now. For those wishing to speak against, particularly the petitioners, we have Justin Keel, Kelly Keel, Carrie Gorski, Lisa Rosenkrantz, Robert Pearson. And if I mispronounce anybody's name, I do apologize. And for those on behalf of the school corporation, we have Kelly Shepard, the superintendent, Tim Goose, the board president, Monica Conrad, board attorney, and Gib Crimmins. For those who are listening, who are just listening and not testifying, or if anybody who wanted to testify and wasn't able to attend the hearing today, we will have an opportunity for persons to speak on the proposed budget by providing written evidence sometime after the hearing, and I'll go into detail about that later. But for those testifying today, if anybody wants to provide written evidence to the department, you may mention it at this time when you are speaking, excuse me, and send it to me after the hearing or during the hearing, and no later than the time period to submit written testimony that I'll go into detail later. All evidence will be cataloged and will become part of the record of the proceedings. For purposes of this hearing, we will consider as evidence the currently adopted budget of the corporation, the petition and claims made therein, and the corporation's response to the petition, all of which was provided to the department prior to this hearing. In terms of general procedures to be observed during the hearing, as stated in the notice, we asked persons wishing to testify to submit a request to the DLGF no later than yesterday, November 17th. Accordingly, persons who have timely submitted their intent to testify will be allowed to do so. Persons who have not done so may still submit written statements to the department. This hearing is being recorded. When you are called to testify, please speak loudly and clearly so that we may record your comments. We will keep everybody who is logged in or has called in on mute unless and until they are called to speak. At this time, I do not intend to impose a time limit on how long anybody wishes to testify. However, I would encourage everybody testifying to be succinct, to the point, and try not to ramble as best you can in order to ensure that we have this hearing moving along smoothly. One person at a time will be called to testify. When you're called, we will unmute you. Please state your name and address clearly for offering comments. You will have, be sure to unmute on your end as well before you offer comments. I expect all speakers to be truthful and state only those facts of which they have personal knowledge. Keep all comments focused on the main issue before us today, which is the proposed budget of Tri-Township Consolidated Schools. Those attempting to raise issues unrelated to the corporation's budget will be interrupted and asked to refocus. If a speaker continues to raise unrelated issues, the speaker will be required to immediately conclude his or her comments. Unrelated comments will include policy decisions of the school corporation. We are here to determine whether the budget is in compliance with Indiana law and not to determine the policy decisions of elected officials. Avoid repeating comments that have been offered by previous speakers. Issues need only be presented once to be considered. Be kind and courteous to each speaker so that all may be heard. And any disruption of the proceedings, such as applauding or speaking out of turn or going on mute and doing so, will serve no purpose. If there's any disruption of the proceedings, I will recess this hearing until order is restored. Otherwise, this hearing will be concluded. As I mentioned before, we will keep everybody on mute, unmuted until persons will be called to speak. So I don't think we'll have an issue with that. Audience members may not ask questions to the person testifying or vice versa. I, as the hearing officer, will see clarification as necessary. It is the responsibility of those offering testimony to raise issues and provide supporting evidence. If you have prepared written remarks, you may submit those as evidence. For the benefit of those listening by phone and may not be able to see the chat box, please don't ask questions of the petitioners of the corporation or provide testimony by using the chat box function. It is inappropriate as well to have ex parte communications with the department. However, if you are having difficulty hearing the proceedings or having some technical difficulties and you're watching on your computer, you may ask for assistance in the chat box. Also, you may use ask a general question about the proceedings in the chat box as well. If you do ask one, that question, procedural question, will be read aloud and answered so that all may hear. Just so everyone's aware, contents of the chat box will be retained by the DLGF as a public record. But since there will not be any substantive questions included in the chat box, it will not be considered as part of the record for these for the department's determination. I will note for the record that Tri-Township School Corporation has submitted its budget forms to the department. This includes the Form 1, the budget estimate, Form 2, estimate of miscellaneous revenue, Form 3, notice to taxpayers, and Form 4, adopted budget ordinance. The department has also received the capital projects plan, which was referenced in the petition, which was submitted by the corporation under a legal requirement independent from this proceeding. Finally, the corporation submitted its response to the petition, which it included as findings prior to adopting its budget. The department acknowledges these as evidence and hereby admits them into the record. Please be aware that I may ask questions concerning these items, whether their contents are brought up in testimony or not. Finally, for those who would like to provide testimony but either had not signed up or was otherwise unable to attend this hearing, the department will allow persons to submit written testimony and evidence they would like the department to consider in its review of the budget. Typically, we allow a period of 7 days after the hearing, but because Thanksgiving is next week, we will allow until the end of the day that following Monday, November 30th. That is by 11:59 p.m. Central Time, November 30th, is when that window closes. You may send written statements and evidence directly to me. I will give you my email, and it will be included in the chat box as well, Jenny, if you could. It's D as in David, M as in Mary, A as in Adam, R as in Robert, U as in us, S as in Sam, A as in Adam, R as in Robert, Z as in Zachary, at DLGF, Department of Local Government Finance, .in.gov. That's David Marusar's. And then our physical address is, again, my name, David Marusar's, Department of Local Government Finance, Indiana Government Center North, room 1058B, 100 North Senate Avenue, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46204. And I will give that out again at the end of the hearing, just so everybody has it. If they come in, if some people come in later during the proceedings. Thank you for listening to that long, almost over 10-minute long introduction. It's appreciate everybody's patience. Again, if there are any questions about how the hearing will be conducted, please you can include that in the chat box. And then we can raise that. I'll give somebody a couple of minutes to do so. Okay. Since nobody has any questions, and then feel free to ask questions in the chat box if you need to as proceedings go on. Again, no testimony, no questions to either party during the proceeding. Just general questions about technology or the proceedings themselves in the chat box, please. So seeing no questions, we'll just begin to receive testimony. We're going to open with those who have are among the petitioners, and I'm going to go in order of when I received the requests. So first we have Justin Keel. Can we see your name? Yeah.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Good afternoon. I want to preface my remarks by saying that I believe strongly in the importance of education and that government in general should be appropriately funded. If the school needs to raise taxes in order to fund its operations, then it absolutely should do so. However, I believe that the power to levy taxes isn't a blank check, rather that governmental units have a burden to prove and to evidence their need. My objection with Tri-Township's budgets are in the way that they fail to clearly evidence this need. My objections are rooted in the way that they present the budget to taxpayers, how the school board itself is blissfully unaware of the financial mechanics of the unit it controls, how the school's administration neglects to properly produce capital projects plans, how they fail to substantiate financial need, and how they blatantly and, quite frankly, lawlessly attempt to block records requests that would give the public insight into their financial position. Whether it's taking over 260 days to produce requested financial documents, stalling instead of providing a summary of account balances, failing to release claim dockets, or trying desperately to hide attorney invoices that fund their battles to conceal records, Tri-Township is committed to ensuring the public does not get an opportunity to inspect their finances. And without transparency, the public is left few tools to determine if the budget is reasonable or not. This behavior is the impetus for this hearing being requested. It is something that should probably have been done years ago when some taxpayers first started asking questions. I would have liked to have been able to comment on more nuanced aspects of the school's finances that inform the creation of their budget, but unfortunately I am mostly limited to what I was able to find in reports provided to and published by the state of Indiana. To begin, Tri-Township is fabricating their capital projects plan. First, they produce a document that doesn't follow the requirements set out in statute and looks nothing like the template that the DLGF provides online or what any of the neighboring school districts produce. Then it tells the public during its budget hearings that the numbers are just arbitrarily contrived to maximize the funds extracted from taxpayers. In its response to a budget petition, which I would note is an exceptionally rare occurrence that illustrates the severe frustrations and distrust of Tri-Township taxpayers, it says that it has no capital expenditures over $10,000 in the next 3 years, something that is completely ludicrous when it plans to construct a 5-classroom addition within the next 18 months. Just the fact that a government unit that flows about $4.5 million through its coffers each year isn't going to spend $10,000 on a single capital expenditure for the next 3 years is a bold-faced lie. And the fact that the school's top administrator admits that the school's budget is arbitrarily set to be the max levy shows a severe lack of respect for the taxpayer. Are we but cash cows, too bovine to deserve a reason or otherwise? If not a single school official or employee could justify the max levy during their budget hearing, it means little when they later, in the petition response, recklessly speculate that the state will slash their funding 10%, which every level of state government denies, or that the reduction of lowed or excise tax distributions, which make up a minuscule portion of their revenue, will hobble their solvency. Next, the school corporation says that it is overspending on employees to the tune of $300,000 and that they are upside down. Yet in the past 2 years, they've grown their financial position by $213,000. And even more strange, in 2019, they transferred $351,000 away from their education fund, which pays teacher salaries, into their operations fund. And according to the school's financial advisor, Mr. Gibb Crimmins, and coincidentally, the administration skipped over this part when reading the rest of the letter aloud during a meeting, the school ended 2019 with a $161,000 shortfall in their education fund and a $193,000 surplus in their operations fund. Now, it appears some money may have needed to have been transferred to balance things out. But if the issue is a shortage in the operations fund, why would you create a large deficit in the education fund and then later suggest eliminating teacher positions as the solution to that problem? It would appear that the school corporation is trying to stockpile state money for capital projects at the cost of teacher salaries and education quality. It's worth noting at this juncture that the school has about $3.9 million in cash and investments. For a school corporation with just 356 students, that is an exceptionally large amount of savings. That's larger than the savings held by the 2 other nearby school corporations, South Central and Westville, who have collectively 5 times more students. And obviously the corporation isn't too worried about liquidity. They now have more saved in investments than at any point in their history. Next, the debt service levy primarily goes towards 2 things: the payment of debt issued by the school and unreimbursed textbooks. Now, while the payment of debt for capital projects is a pretty non-negotiable thing, using the debt service levy to pay for unreimbursed textbooks is something I think most taxpayers are completely unaware of. As far as I can recall, neither the school board nor the administration at Tri-Township has ever mentioned raising the debt service levy to generate funds for unreimbursed textbooks. In its 2021 debt worksheet, Tri-Township reports $44,475 is being raised for unreimbursed textbooks this past year. As best I can tell, the $900 fund is the curricular materials rental fund. It began calendar year 2019, at which time no debt service levy for textbooks appeared to be collected, with $13,730, and ended the year with $31,033. So why does the school need to raise such a large amount of money for textbooks this year? With 356 students, that works out to about $125 per student just for unreimbursed textbooks. This is more than the $4 per student that neighboring South Central collects for the same purpose. Is the school corporation neglecting to collect textbook rental fees and passing the costs on to taxpayers, or is it pretending it needs unreimbursed textbook fees covered so that it can pad its budget elsewhere? I hope they realize this has serious ramifications for the circuit breaker and other governmental units. As if the situation wasn't disturbing enough, the school's most recent audit shows instances where fund transfers weren't approved, receipts were missing, bank reconciliations didn't match by over $460,000, and internal controls were found to be lacking. The school corporation suffers from severe nepotism and frequent conflicts of interest. It often uses closed executive sessions to seemingly wrangle board consensus and strategize how to subvert the public. It even goes so far as to erase any mention of public objections about the budget from its minutes. Tri-Township needs additional state oversight. It needs transparency, and it needs accountability. I urge the Department of Local Government Finance to look carefully at Tri-Township's budget and review the claims they make to ensure that taxpayers are not being taken advantage of by a school corporation who shows nothing but contempt for citizens who ask too many tough questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. I don't know if I said this before, but I during the proceedings, but I will probably be asking some questions on the testimony if I think I need to, just so everyone's aware. And I guess, Justin, could you speak more to what could you give an example of what the DLGF, could you give an example of what you would like the DLGF to do in terms of certifying when it reviews the budget? Because our statutory obligation is to certify the budget rate and levy of a school corporation or of any unit, and we have some instructions first to define that it's fundable, and then for those that are subject to levy, and then those who are if there is no levy, we just certify the budget. So could you give an example of what you would like the department to do?
I think an easy first example would be related to the debt service levy. I think this is one where the Department of Local Government Finance could probably seek additional information from the school corporation about what is going on with the unreimbursed textbook fund. There's also areas in regards to the rest of their budget, the education and the operations fund, where there's probably some questions that need to be asked about why money is being transferred. In some cases, we've had difficulty getting the documents that would tell us that. So we're kind of hoping that the Department of Local Government Finance might have the ability to do that and ask those questions and see what they think if it should be certified. Perhaps they'll be able to prove that it should be. Okay.
As far as the public records, it's that's noted. Your concerns about the public records requests. I will note. Has there been any complaint filed with the public access counselor?
Yes.
Okay.
Unfortunately, his opinion won't be issued until December 7th, which is a ways after this meeting.
Okay. Thank you. And just so everybody, and just for those, especially on the petitioner side, is aware, the question I asked Justin about what you would like the department to do, I'll probably be asking that question as well. Again, I'm not trying to instruct you how to testify. Just be aware of that, because that's one of the things that we were curious about with the petition. Thank you, Justin. Next up is Kelly Keel.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay. My question has to do with the transfer of the funds between the education fund and the operation fund. One of the things that is often said is that we are upside down in our finances. That's something that Mr. Shepard has said, and that, it's hard to get teachers because we don't pay as well as other schools pay. And so it seems like the problem is we don't have enough money in order to be paying the teachers. But then why is the school moving so much money away from its education fund, the one that would be paying for its teachers, and moving it into its operations fund? In 2019, they drained down the education fund by about $160,000. And then they put that into the operations fund, leaving a $190,000 surplus in operations. Now they want to increase property taxes by the maximum amount, despite having millions in savings. Is the Department of Local Government Finance sure that they actually need to be doing that when Mr. Shepard has said that the budget is arbitrary? It seems like we should be using the money instead of transferring it over where it's just sitting in a bank account for operations. We should be using that money to pay for teachers, since the concern is always that we can't get good enough teachers, or we have to let teachers go because we don't have the funds.
Okay. All right, I don't have any questions, Kelly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Next up is Carrie Gorski.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right. My question's already been asked. My testimony has already been covered. So thank you.
Just so we have, is it, could you at least state what it was generally about?
It's mainly about draining down the education fund.
Okay. All right. That'll be noted in the record. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Lisa Rosenkrantz.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My questions have mostly been covered as well. They were pertaining to the transference of monies between the Education Operations Fund. I also have some other questions, which include why are the buses at Tri-Township estimated at so much more of an expense than our neighboring districts? I did not know we had that many more buses compared to our neighboring school districts. Also, I am very curious as to why the school corporation states there are no $10,000 or above capital projects in the next 3 years, as they plan to close our high school and build a wing of 5 classrooms onto the Wanata campus, also in which they have no cost of demolition or maintenance of the abandoned building included in any of these plans. And I'd also like to know why the budget is arbitrary. Those are all of my questions.
Oh, sorry. We had you muted for a second there. I had a question for you, Lisa. When you talk about the buses of the neighboring school corporations, could you name those school corporations?
South Central, East Porter, any school corporation other than Tri-Township,
You mean in the
North
county?
Judson.
Yeah. Okay. Can you give an
Look.
example? Yeah, right. So can you give an example of how the costs are higher? And I guess the question is, there's a bus replacement plan for the school corporation, right, for Tri-Township?
Correct.
And there's one for South Central and East Porter, right?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. So but you're essentially saying that the Tri-Township bus replacement plan is estimating costs to be higher, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And okay. Thank you. That's all I had. Okay. Last up is Robert Pearson.
Yeah. Hello, can you hear me?
I can, yes. Go ahead.
My question's already been presented, and it was about the budget being arbitrary. I just wanted to know if that was normal for a school board and superintendent to do that so they can obtain the max levy. So it's already been out there. So thanks for inviting me to speak. I appreciate it.
No, thank you. Okay, I don't have any questions for you, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so that takes care of everybody on behalf of the petitioners. And again, of course, there's going to be the opportunity for everybody, whether they testify or not, to provide written evidence if they would like to. We'll move over to the school corporation. We'd like to hear from them. I do have a list of four people I'm going to begin with Kelly Shepard. Is he on?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can, Mr. Shepard. Thank you.
And I have with me, sitting next to me in my office, David Gibb Crimmins, who has helped me prepare the budget the last 2 years.
Okay. Did you want to defer to him, or did you have some remarks?
I mean, we'll tackle them together. I mean,
Okay. I guess however you want to approach it. I guess the you know, I'm not going to try to I'm not going to try to narrow or focus. I guess the focus, the one thing I want to focus on, I guess, from what the petitioners had to say, and not saying that, you know, that we're going to ignore everything else, but I guess the one claim that, and of course, speak to whatever you want to speak on, is the nature of the budget.
Yes. So first and foremost, I will admit that in a meeting, I did refer to the arbitrary nature of creating that budget. I now know that's obviously not the way that you want to portray that.
Okay.
I will say that yes, this small school corporation does need every available dollar it can get.
Mm-hmm.
And we created the budget in that manner. This is my third budget cycle. I will openly and honestly consider myself a novice in school budget, which is why I have help and why the board asked me to have help. I will say that this budget has been created the same way on my behalf the last 3 years. And when I look in our files and what I inherited, it's been created the same way for probably the last 6 to 8 years. So yeah, there is that.
Can you hear me?
Is that
Members of the board, this is Monica Conrad, and I'm the board attorney. And if I just may, and then shift back to Mr. Crimmins and also Mr. Shepard. First off, on behalf of all of us with regard to Tri-Township Consolidated School Corporation, we appreciate your time. We appreciate that you guys have reviewed the submissions that have come before this. We appreciate the opportunity to present further information or to supplement what has already been provided. As we have understood this process, as it's been outlined in Indiana Code, we understand, that we have obligations in terms of notice to hold a local budget hearing, to submit these things to you all at the, at the DLGF. We also are aware that as we walk through the requirements of state statute with regard to proposing that budget and to submitting that to you all for approval, it is our belief that we have followed those statutory requirements. It's our understanding that under the statute, that the statute really looks closely at the process and procedures that we have followed in terms of getting there, in getting that approval. I know that some of the objections that have been raised are really extraneous to what is identified under Indiana Code, under the budget adoption provision that's laid out in 6-1.1-17. It is not clear, to what degree that this board is looking at including or considering some of those extraneous concerns. It's kind of our belief that some of those extraneous concerns really are probably beyond the preview of this board. However, I think that with regard to looking at where this board's focus is, and I think it's appropriately kind of been somewhat framed already in terms of looking at, the AB that's being requested, as well as looking at what has been proposed in the budget. There was a process to take comment at the local level. There was the complaint that was filed. That complaint was filed with the superintendent, and then there was a response that was prepared. That all of that then came back to the board for consideration when they finally adopted the budget to submit then to the DLGF. We've been very transparent about both those objections and our responses to that. I think Mr. Crimmins, who is the school's consultant, financial consultant, he has helped prepare the budget. Mr. Crimmins comes with many years of working in the area of school finance, has also been a superintendent, and he has walked through this budget process with Mr. Shepard, making sure that we kind of dotted the I's and crossed our T's with regard to that. I'll let Mr. Crimmins kind of detail a little bit more about, what considerations went into that budget and preparing that budget. I think it's no secret to this board or to anybody that at this time, when you look at what is expected to occur for all schools in the state of Indiana, we know that there is going to be in the next year some budget restrictions. I know that has been talked about even in our newspapers in the last couple of days here in terms of where the Indiana General Assembly is going to set that budget with regard to school districts. We know that there's going to be some amount of constriction, maybe not. We also know that there's some tensions with regard to ensuring that teachers are fairly compensated, which has been an area of significant restriction for all schools. I think all of those things that I think kind of played into the considerations by Mr. Crimmins as he prepared the budget, as well as in talking to Mr. Shepard. But I can let them kind of walk through the details of that if you don't mind.
Thank you, Monica. Just so everyone is aware, Monica Conrad was listed as one of the persons wanting to testify. I do have a question, and I mentioned this when Mr. Keel had spoken. As you know, the statutory obligation of the school corporation is to follow the process, but the statutory obligation of the DLGF is to certify the budget rate and levy of the school corporation under certain guidelines spelled out in statute. So I did make that apparent at the beginning, at the outset, or when Mr. Keel was speaking. I did want to, the school corporation is aware of the concerns that Mr. Keel and others had spoken at this hearing about the public records request, and he mentioned the complaint with public access counselor and some of the other complaints they have. So the school corporation is aware of those?
Yes, the school corporation is aware of those, but we do not believe that this is the appropriate forum to be trying to clarify those, or that this is the appropriate process for those to be clarified.
Okay.
I would also just to supplement, we understand that there is a considerable, there are individuals within the community who are opposed to any kind of changes with regard to our building and facilities, with regard to closing a facility and to looking at any kind of new construction. We understand that that's out there too. We don't see that process as being a part of this process that you're doing. That process has its own set of rules in terms of how that operates.
Is that project going to be funded by property tax? And this is for either Mr. Shepard, Gibb, or yourself. Is that going to be a property tax, and is there going to be a debt service levy involved for next year?
If that happens.
Okay.
Yeah, if that happens, then yes, that would be accurate.
Okay. All right. Is that, Ms. Conrad, are you, is that all?
Yes, that's,
Okay.
thank you very much.
Thank you. You said, is it Gib Crimmins you wanted to speak?
Yes, I have a couple comments to make on, I've worked with budgets for 25 years now. And, it's always a challenge, and you're estimating revenue, you're estimating expenses. But if you look at the 2019 expenditures of the two main funds, the education and the operation, it was within $30,000 of break even. And that's out of nearly $4 million budgets of the two combined. And a little history, prior to 2019, we had the general fund, and then we had the transportation, bus replacement, and capital projects funds. And they changed the law to go with the education and the operations fund. Several areas that were paid for out of the general fund prior to 2019 now have to be paid for out of the operation fund. So when they changed the law, they encouraged schools to look at those areas that had been a general fund expense that now have to be operational and transfer that amount out of the educational fund into operations. Because in the past, the CPF, bus replacement, and transportation were allowed to build up funds. So, if you had to buy 2 buses in 1 year, you had funds built up. If you had a major boiler go out or something like that, you had funds built up. So they recommend transferring. And I believe in 2019, did you transfer 240,000?
I believe that's right.
And looking back, that's probably more than was necessary, but it had to start somewhere. This year's budget, we have budget in there to transfer 120,000. But there's several expenses in the operation fund that had been general fund expenses, more than $120,000. I'm sure of that. But the way that's set up, it's really the money can be transferred back and forth. So it's really the grand total of what is available. And a major concern that schools are going to have a tendency to do is eat up that operations fund that used to be allowed to build up for unforeseen things in order to fund the education fund. So that's where that's rub is a little bit. Money could be transferred back, but it's the grand total of the two funds together is really what counts. It doesn't really matter which balance grows and which one does not grow. We want to try to be as accurate as you can, but just to reiterate, it's scheduled to do 120,000 out of the education into operations, which is not going to be as much as what those areas that now have to be paid for out of the operations fund, which prior to the law change was general fund expenses.
Okay. Yeah. No, I mean, in 2019, the operations fund was essentially created. I think, legislative intent is, it's difficult to ascertain sometimes with Indiana. But I think the intent of the legislature in this case was for the operations fund was to allow easier transfer, not only between the education or the state teacher salaries and the operations, the administrative costs, as you mentioned, but also in between things like costs for transportation, things for bus replacement. But I think the point I think from what the petitioner said, an argument could be made that because the operations fund is no longer as siloed as it used to be, now that everything related to bus replacement can also be used for capital projects, that it kind of compels the school corporations to be more to be able to try to be as close as they possibly can. Obviously, things happen. Nobody predicted 2020 would happen the way it did. as far as expenses and whatnot. So at the same time, things like costs attributed to bus replacement, if they're estimated too low or too high, that may require them to either pull money from transportation, or that would be otherwise for transportation or other things, or capital projects, or pull things from bus replacement and attribute them to things for transportation costs. So can you speak to that?
Yes, and
what the petitioners are concerned about.
When they changed the law, our concern statewide was the old law kind of protected schools from themselves. So it was earmarked, that money was in transportation to fund transportation, and it was in bus replacement to fund and build up for bus replacement. And that made it so you could not rob Peter to pay Paul and somewhere down the road run out of money. But they've opened it up to make it easier, which it does, but it opens the door to get in a real bind. For example, in 2019, had they had a major equipment malfunction, that $30,000 surplus in the total balances could easily have been down $200,000 or $300,000. Fortunately, they did not have anything like that, but they have to have that build up. There's going to have to be some major roof work done in these buildings before long. Well, you have to have funds built up to do that. So, a roof project can very easily be $1 million, and you can't raise that all at once. So it's a fine line, how much you allow to build up in there. And well, it seems nice to just use it all to fund ongoing costs. Then you're in a real bind if a major issue comes up. And in the operations fund, the legislator set up a growth factor, and it's based on a 6-year non-farm income formula. This year, the growth factor, I think, was 3.6%. That's the highest it's ever been. It may be down to 1%. It will be down next year because of you have a high income from 6 years ago going off and a lower income coming on this year. So they anticipate it will be down, but they establish that growth factor each year working the budget.
Are you referring to the MLGQ?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's 4.2 for next year's taxes. They're allowed to increase by 4.2, and that's not just for school corporations. That's for every single unit that levies property tax. They are able to do that by law. And I think it's based. You mentioned it's based on a 60-year growth factor, based on the non-farm income. I had a question. I had the question and I had lost it. I apologize. 1 second.
And when we're looking to build a budget, I mean, there's nothing in stone, and I applaud the legislators for saying, they're going to do everything they can to keep funding the education fund full force. But we've also lived through this, about 10 years ago. If the state doesn't have the money, they're not going to send the money. And at some point, there's going to be some probable day of reckoning with what no one's fault, but what the state's going through right now. Revenue is not coming in, and we certainly hope they can fund everything. But when 50% plus of the state budget goes to K-12 education, they can't cut everything else completely just to maintain K-12 funding. So there's a strong likelihood there's going to be some financial challenges from the state funding schools.
Did that factor in? I remember the question I was going to ask. It had to do, and you alluded to this. How the development of the budget, what you had all taken into account, was that part of it? The fact that the state, we don't know what's going to happen with the legislature next in a couple of months, the early part of next year, what they're going to do with the state funding. But did that play into your calculus at all?
Yes, it definitely did play into the calculus. And when the revenue versus expenses was within 30,000, that just is not very much wiggle room. And that's when things went pretty good as far as major expenses.
We talked at length, Gib and I did throughout the process about the unknowns. And this is right now we're in the midst of more unknowns than we've ever dealt with. So that certainly factored into the approach that we took.
Now, of course, when the department reviews, does its certification of the budget, we were going to, especially when it pertains to the operations fund, we're statutorily required to determine its fundability, and if we determine that whatever the budget, the adopted budget was set at, if it's expected revenues such as property tax levy, lit, I believe you receive excise as well, maybe some other revenues aren't able to meet that, we're going to be reducing the budget, and that's not just a comment toward Mr. Shepard and Mr. Crimmins. That's just general statement to everybody, but just so that you are aware.
Yes.
As far as the debt service, based on your budget submission, you had reported, and I think I already asked this, the adopted budget of $303,500. That's not, you're not planning on issuing any debt anytime before the end of the year, correct?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. But there's a possibility that you might issue debt for this proposed project to the school, correct, for next year? You might issue it next year, but that wouldn't apply until at the earliest 2022.
That's correct.
Okay. And can you speak to Mr. Keel's comments about the unreimbursed textbooks? I admit I'm not quite sure I get the full background of it, but could you at least speak to what the school does with that?
Yes, the unreimbursed textbook, that is students on free and reduced lunch that the school does not get fully funded. It's not for people who are paying their full textbook rental. And then it's been for years that the school can apply for a small portion to make up what they do not get from the reimbursement on the free and reduced lunch or students as far as textbook reimbursement.
Okay. Is that the Common School Fund loan? I know that term's tossed around a bit. Is that the Common School Fund loan, or am I thinking of something else?
I think you're thinking something else.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. All right, but that is unreimbursed textbooks is to be done, or that loan, as it were, is something that was included. Let's see. I'm going to look through the forms here. Excuse me a minute. Yeah, under debt service, it does have, according to your budget estimate, you have $70,000 for unreimbursed textbooks. And that's something that you plan to pursue next year? Or is that something you've already taken out?
Well, no, they have not taken it out for next year.
Okay, so it's taken out this year and you're trying to pay it back.
Well, each year, that small amount can be put into the textbook fund to make up for what is not reimbursed by the state on free and reduced lunch students.
Okay. One moment, please. I'm taking notes. I've been taking notes throughout this hearing, so I'm trying to make sure I get everything down. I guess the last question I had to do with the transfer of the funds. I did see in the budget submission that you had a resolution for the transfer of funds from the operations to the education funds. That was another point that petitioners were concerned about. As far as I know, as I understand, by statute, the school corporation is limited to transferring no more than 15% from one year or from one fund from the education to the operations. Just so everybody is aware, the DLGF has no statutory responsibility over that. I believe that if anything, that's a Department of Education. If I remember correctly, that's a Department of Education function. There's some notice or things, something like that, put on their website if they transfer over. I think don't hold me to that. I'm just remembering trying to remember off the top of my head. But it's so the transfer was from $120,000. Is that over 15%?
No, it's only about 5%. And a little history on that. When they changed the law into the two different operations education, they arbitrarily picked out the number of 15% as a recommendation. There's not technically a law saying you cannot do over that. If you do, you have to justify why you do it. I think they're looking at 5% transfer is what they're looking at.
We have, when we set that up, we were under 15% out of the gates. I want to say the first year we did it, Gibb wasn't helping me at that time, but Ralph Walker was. I want to say we were about 12%. Because again, every business manager or superintendent of the state you're trying to figure out how much do we need to transfer. So we've actually lowered it in all three of my budget cycles. Started out about 12%, lowered it the next year, and now we've lowered it further down to about 5% on that. Okay. And you said last year that was 12%. The year before last, it was about 12. And so it was somewhere between the 12 and 5 in year 2. And actually we also did stop that transfer towards the end of the year because we were seeing that we didn't need to complete those last few transfers. So we're trying to seek that level water line on what that proper transfer amount is for our particular budget and those two funds. Okay. Okay, so what I'm hearing is that the intent of the transfer is to try to balance operations and education costs. That's correct. Okay. All right. Okay. I don't think I have any other questions for Mr. Crimmins or Mr. Shepard. Unless you have anything else to add. Anything else? Oh, sorry.
No, I think that pretty well covers how we went through the process. And it's a pretty fine line between expenses and revenue. Which fund is positive, which negative is not as important as the overall two funds combined. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Last I have is Tim Goose. Is he on? Yes, I see you.
Hello, David.
Hello.
I'm just here as a representative of the board, supporting Kelly Shepard and his responsibilities. I've sat on the board and been part of the Cass Township, now Tri-Township, for going on 10 years. And there's never been a lack of transparency with what has been provided. And we have been, the dollar amount, or the ADM has mentioned 356 children. We have always been running the process, the functions, as conservatively and as frugally as possible to make sure we have a mechanism to make sure that we keep our kids safe and provide the best services that we can. And this has already been mentioned by Mr. Crimmins and Mr. Shepard, but a lot of this and the ability to interpret what has happened in the past prior to the changes in 2019 to 2020 was a mechanism of those changes, and how you look at the budget, the revenue versus expenses. And we've been battling an increased amount of expenses versus the revenue coming in for many, many years. And as long as I've sat on this board, which has caused us to inflict many, many changes in the last 5 or 10 years. Mr. Shepard is not only our superintendent, he's also a janitor. He's also our transportation director. He's holding many, many functions. And within the last year, we've also had to unfortunately not replace or RIF many of our employees within the school system and not replace them, because we're running things as frugally as possible. So many of the things that we've always looked at, if you look at the budget that was applied this year, like that was mentioned earlier, it looks much, much similar to what it has in the last 3 to 5 years. Nothing has changed how we're running the operations, other than we're trying to make sure that we're looking at the current process with the 2 funds of education and operations, and bring those together to make sure we're being, again, fiscally responsible, and to make sure we can operate our company, or not our corporation, functionally. So if you look at, again, what we're up against every day with reduced projections of ADM, looking at our K through 12 and up and coming students, and then the increased cost with reduced revenues coming in, again, we're consistent with what we're projecting for our CPF to be, what has taken place in recent years. But many of the changes or the transfers that you're speaking of are just a representation of us trying to figure out how to balance our budget and not deter from the challenges coming against us with legislation potential, the impacts of COVID, and everything that we're kind of competing with on a regular basis.
Okay. Thank you. I don't have any questions for you, Mr. Goose. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Okay, that is all who I have signed to testify. Thank you all for speaking today. I appreciate everybody's comments and being able to answer some questions. And like I said, for those who want to testify or want to be able to provide some additional testimony, or if we're not able to speak today, there will be an additional opportunity for a period of about until the end of the day on November 30th to submit written statements. Like I said, I provided my email and physical address earlier at the hearing. I'll provide it again. It is in the chat box, I believe, for those who can who are on the computer. My email is D as in David, M as in Mary, A as in Adam, R as in Robert, U as in us, S as in Sam, A as in Adam, R as in Robert, Z as in Zachary, at dlgf.in.gov. Our physical address is 100 or Indiana Government Center North, room 1058B as in Barry, 100 North Senate Avenue, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46204. In order to make sure that we get it in time, we get it in a timely manner, I encourage that you send it by email. But if you have to submit it by physically by mail, we will accept it if it's postmarked on or before November 30th. So thank you all for your listening, attending, and for this provided testimony. I will consider the issues raised, evidence presented today and for the period of time after the hearing, and will make a recommendation to the Commission of the DLGF. There being no other matters at hand, I believe we are concluded. Thank you all again for your attention. These hearings are hereby concluded.